Yate, my relatives. This is Mark Charles. It is almost noon here in Washington, D.C. It is Friday, May 7th, and I'm sitting down drinking my second cup of coffee. And I wanted just to jump online and chat about a few things yet this morning. Well, it's only morning for a few more minutes here on the East Coast. But I just wanted to chat about a few things this morning and then let you know of some things I'm going to be doing over the weekend and even later today, hopefully. So before I begin, as I always do, I just want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from Washington, D.C., and these are the lands of the Piscataway. And I want to thank the Piscataway for their stewardship of these lands. I want to state how humbled I am to be living on these lands today. So my Piscataway relatives. I'm trying something a little bit new. I go back and forth regarding my second cup of coffee, where I like to give some deep analysis and talk about some deep things and give a new perspective on stuff. But I also want more just a casual time where I can talk about a few things that are coming up without feeling like I have to have kind of this groundbreaking, world-changing, paradigm-shifting discussion every time I go on. So I'm trying to balance back and forth between the two and just get a little more comfortable coming online and talking and actually drinking some of my coffee during my second cup of coffee time. So I'm trying to switch the format up a little bit. And I'm working on at least a year and a half to maybe 2 year strategy. And what I'm trying to do is to see if I can grow my social media audience and grow the platform that I'm using to speak from, and use the platform that I have to both change people's paradigm and get you discussing things that we don't discuss, especially in mainstream media and even on social media, but also to teach the history and to unpack some of the stuff I've written about, whether it's in my book Unsettling Truths or in the lectures I give on the doctrine of discovery. And so I'm working with a 18 to 24 month time frame to see, can I grow this platform and actually have something at the end of that period that is fairly substantial. In 18 to 24 months, we will be near the end of the midterm elections, and I will begin thinking more strategically and concretely about, am I going to run in 2024? And one of the questions I need to ask is, can I grow this audience, right? Can I have a platform that is more substantial than what I had even in the last election in 2020? So that's one of my goals. The second is just, I'm trying to get more casual. I'm trying to get better at just not feeling like I have to be a really high produced show, but to something I can just jump on and do very casually. I don't have staff right now. I have an assistant who helps me with some correspondence and emails, but as far as on my live stream, this is me. And so I don't have any other people. I don't have an entourage that goes with me. So whether it's doing my my sunrise live streams or these here, I just kind of have this little, if you want to call it a studio, that I set up, and I turn on the lights and do this all myself. So I do have a friend named Phil who helps me a lot with moderating some of these live streams, and he does a great job. And I really appreciate him jumping on and sharing some links and just kind of answering some questions on the live streams that come up that I can't always catch during the chat. So thank you, Phil, for doing that. But anyway, so one of the philosophies I'm working on is comes from the teaching that I've given and some things I've seen regarding the difference between power and authority, where power is the ability to act and authority is the right of jurisdiction. And instead of just striving after power, right? And when you especially look at media is filled with power. You pay for a large audience and you spend a ton of money and you can advertise to millions and millions of people. And, I've been working in the internet since almost the very beginning. I was in college at UCLA when the internet, I used to say, I was on campus when Al Gore came on campus to invent the internet. UCLA was one of the first universities on this worldwide network that they were building with the government, with the Defense Department, and it was called the Information Superhighway back then. And I remember Al Gore coming to campus for meetings frequently during my 5 years at UCLA. But anyway, so I've seen the internet kind of develop around me. I remember the analog world before the internet. I know the digital world now after it. I actually worked as a computer programmer for a number of years during the late 90s and early 2000s. And I've been on the internet. I actually taught myself HTML by using a Vi editor. I was not an early adapter to social media. I kind of stood back and watched it. But when I did jump in, maybe 15 years ago, I kind of jumped in with both feet and used it. And I've always had a strategy for my social media. But one of the things I'm convinced of is that there is a window that's closing where you can have a global audience for the price of a library card. And one of the things that both helped and hurt President Trump so badly helped him tremendously and hurt him badly, is he was probably the first candidate, the first true president who actually brought a social media audience into his campaign. He had a very strong following before he ran, and he used that to amplify his voice. And that was that was incredibly helpful for his campaign, but it was also massively damaging, right? Because he had a way, I used to joke that he could sit on the toilet and tweet to his supporters. And it sounded like he did most of the time. What he tweeted smelled pretty rancid, like he was tweeting from the toilet. But, he knew he could bypass mainstream paid media and reach out to millions of his followers instantaneously. And that's what made him so dangerous, right? Is he brought a large social media audience into his campaign, and he used it highly effectively throughout his campaign and even throughout his presidency. And so then when he got banned from Twitter permanently and from Facebook temporarily, right, this cut off his whole way of communicating with his base. And so, but it was fascinating to watch because most candidates, Hillary Clinton, even Barack Obama, President Obama, definitely, other candidates, Joe Biden, they got on social media because they were running. And they expanded their base because they were running. And so, it was interesting to see the way Trump did it. And he especially used it very effectively during his 2016 campaign. And I'm convinced, and one of the reasons I ran in 2020, and I'm running in this period right now, is because I'm convinced there's a closing window where you can have a global audience for the price of a library card and technically some of your privacy. I don't think that window is going to stay open forever. I'm pretty certain that not only right now it's kind of metered through the algorithms that social media uses, but I'm fairly certain the ability to just post things for free and have it reach globally, I don't think, I'm guessing that's going to find a way not only to be metered, but even paid for in the future. And so one of the reasons I ran in 2020 was I knew I wasn't going to be able to raise the money that the other candidates raised, but I knew that I could potentially use social media to reach a very large group of people. I didn't grow my audience as well as I had hoped during the campaign or even before it, but I was convinced, and I said this to my staff a lot, and I said it to myself even more frequently, right? As long as we have a smartphone and some gas money, we can keep this campaign going. And I was even fairly convinced all the way up till the end of the campaign that because our message was so compelling, because, again, anyone who watched our 9-minute announcement video, even a few weeks or even a few days before the campaign, would reach out to our campaign and say, your message is amazing. You're hitting all the things our nation needs to be discussing. And they were shocked that I wasn't getting more media. When they heard what we were talking about and what we were saying, and they heard our vision, and even if they didn't fully agree with us, but they were so compelled by it, people were flabbergasted. How are you not getting more media coverage? Why am I not hearing about you until now? And I was convinced all the way up to the end that if somehow our message got into mainstream media, it had the potential to change or at least impact the election all the way up to the very end, which is one of the reasons I stayed in. Is I knew that our message was compelling enough that if it got the play it needed, I would say it deserved, it would be a game changer. And so I said to my staff, I said to myself, as long as we have a smartphone and some gas money, we have the ability, and at the end we didn't even need gas money because we completely shut down the campaign and we were 100% virtual. But we had the ability to reach a national audience for free. And so I'm still operating on that principle. I decided very early on in my social media use that I was not going to try to monetize my social media, and I wasn't going to grow my social media kind of through the shock and awe mentality of let's just shock people and get them screaming at each other. I've worked very hard throughout my time online the past 15 years to nurture a place where honest discussion can be had and even disagreement can be engaged in without screaming at each other. And I've worked hard to maintain that on my social media. And I've also worked hard not to have it just be it's constantly throwing things at you, but I've worked hard to keep my social media a place where it's a bit different. Whether it's, back on the res, it was posting pictures of the sunrise. Now it's live streaming the sunrise. It's having longer discussions instead of just short clips. But all of this has a strategy of how I want to engage my audience. And so I'm going to be even more intentional about it for the next 18 months. Can I continue to grow this platform? Can we really create a space that has dialogue? I'm convinced now that mainstream media is not going to ever cover us. They're not. They know about me. They're aware I'm out there. But they just completely ignore this message because, right, they can't advertise for it. And mainstream media is all about, it's not about bringing news. It's about selling advertising and about creating this kind of worldview bubble that their viewers live in. And which brings me to the thing I wanted to talk about today, which is the news bias that we have. I tweeted about a week ago where I said CNN and MSNBC are as toxic as Fox News is. And if your worldview is defined by any of those three networks, CNN, MSNBC, or Fox News, you have a highly partisan and deeply skewed view of the world. And now many people are going to hear and say, if I said that just about Fox News, they would agree with me. But when I say it about CNN and MSNBC, because those are the propaganda machines for the left, people are like, no, they're the good guys. They're the ones that we need to be listening to. We need to be hearing CNN and MSNBC. They're the ones who are countering the stuff on Fox News. And Fox News is bad. I completely agree. They're toxic. But CNN and MSNBC are exactly the same thing. It's just you're much more, you actually want their toxicity is the problem. But they're not healthy news services. They're not healthy. They are deeply, deeply biased, and they give a very skewed view of the world. And you should not be receiving the majority of your news from either of those three networks. And if you don't believe me, I tweeted this too. I said, turn it off for a week. Don't consume it for a week. And just see how differently you feel and how different the world looks, because you're not getting it through this highly partisan and propagandized lens that Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN present to the world. Now, it's also true that much of the mainstream media we have leans to the left. That's very, very, very true. There's a far fewer mainstream news sources that lean to the right. The majority of, including the networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, and most of the major newspapers, New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, they all lean to the left. And so even the worldview that we get in most of just by even avoiding the three worst ones that are still the mainstream, we're still getting a very skewed view to the left. And this is clear. So one of the things, there's a few sites that I encourage people to use. The first one that I use fairly frequently is called All Sides. And they have a media bias chart that they use, that they have that just gives a chart of where the mainstream media outlets fall on their terms of bias. And then there's another one called Ad Fontes Media. I think I'm saying that right. And they have a media bias chart as well. That's a bit more comprehensive than the All Sides. I posted both of them into the chat of this live stream. And I actually use these fairly frequently. They update them. As news cycles change and audiences change, they update the biases of each of them. But I go through these at least once a year and look deeply at, okay, where am I getting my news from and where is the bias? What side am I hearing it on? And I want to make sure I'm getting more facts and less opinion. And so I've been fairly intentional to use some of these charts, and these aren't the only two. There's a lot more out there to understand the bias that I'm getting fed, right? And it's important to remember that all news is biased. There's no such thing as unbiased news, right? All news is biased, just like there's no unbiased person. We're all biased. We all have a lens, a context, a worldview that we see the world through, and we present it both implicitly and explicitly through those lenses. It's not a bad thing. It's just, but we have to understand that we all have biases and all news has biases. And so it's important, it's not that we're going to avoid bias, but it's important to understand what bias are we being fed. And just to demonstrate this, each morning I wake up and I listen to a news podcast. And I'll give you a rundown of some of the news that I listen to in the morning. I have my my alarm set for actually Pandora radio comes on quietly and wakes me up to some music, and then my Google Voice Assistant gives me it tells me about my day, and I've chosen the news sources I want to hear first thing in the morning after I hear the weather and some other things about the day. Then it plays my news podcasts, and the order that I have them in right now is my first one is AP News, and AP and Reuters are consistently rated as some of the most factual based, least biased news sources out there. And so I work actually very hard, I'm very intentional to get my headlines from AP News. Now, reading AP News is not nearly as exciting as reading it from CNN or Fox News, because they're often not trying to just, emote you into reading their news sources. And so their stories are more factual based. They're more kind of straightforward. They're not near as eye-catching or as headline grabbing. But I work hard to get my headlines from AP. So I listen to the AP News update first. Then I listen to the NPR News Now update, and I like those because they update during the week almost hourly, and so every hour there's a new update that's out there. I then listen to the ABC News update and the BBC World Minute. After those two, I listen to Fox News and their headlines, and they're higher up on my list because they also update their news podcasts hourly. And so I don't listen every hour, but I like to hear throughout the day what's going on. And then I listen to the Wall Street Journal. They update their What's News podcast, I think, twice a day. I listen to the CNN news briefing. Then I listen to Reuters. Again, I put my fact-based news sources both at the top and towards the bottom, so I don't start or end with the propaganda. And so I listen to, after CNN, I listen to Reuters, and then I listen to USA Today 5 Things, and then I go into more global news with NPR World News and NHK World News from Japan. And then I'll have Times the Brief I'll listen to, and New York Times Daily Briefing, as well as Al Jazeera. And then it goes into a field that I don't listen to nearly as much. But I listen to those fairly frequently, and I go through it, listen, or sometimes I'll change the order a little bit. But again, I make sure I get my headlines from the more factual-based ones. I both kind of try to start and end my news consumption with the facts-based outlets. But so it was a week ago, maybe a week or 2 weeks ago, when we issued a very strict travel ban to and from India in the US. And almost all of the news media outlets were covering it. And they were highlighting, we've been talking about the news in the news for weeks now, how India is going through a massive surge in coronavirus, and they're setting records daily. They're up to now over 400,000 new infections a day. And they've been at the top of the headlines of almost every news agency for the past week or 2 weeks. Their hospitals are in crisis, and there's a lot of things going on there. And so I'm hearing all of these updates, and this was about a week ago, I think, when that ban went into effect. And all the news agencies were covering it. What's interesting about listening to these podcasts in succession like this is it's interesting to see A, what order they put their news in, and then B, what they title their news headlines, and so how they report it. And so it was interesting to hear Fox News when they got to talking about the India travel ban that the Biden administration issued, and it went into effect about a week ago. They were the only news agency that I heard on these series of news podcasts, that noted it was in 2020 that Donald Trump issued his China travel ban, and Joe Biden criticized him for issuing that travel ban. I just posted something from the Washington Post, a fact checker, about Biden's rhetoric back in 2020 regarding Trump's China ban, travel ban from China. But what was interesting was Fox News was the only news agency that mentioned it. Others reported it if you go to their websites and looked a bit deeper, others were reporting it. CNN, I didn't see CNN reporting it. I might have missed it, but I didn't see them or MSNBC reporting it at all. But it was interesting that Fox News, and of course it's obvious why Fox News did it, right? They're the right-leaning Republican-based propaganda machine. They are fully in support of Trump, and they don't like Biden, and so they had to call out the hypocrisy, which it was hypocrisy on Biden's account. I'm not saying we should not have made the travel ban to and from India, just like we should have made the travel ban to and from China a year ago, when there were massive numbers of infections coming from that location. But it was interesting to see who reported it. And so again, this is why it's so important to have a variety of news sources. And I encourage everyone I talk to, do not allow Fox News, CNN, or MSNBC to shape your worldview. Don't let them do it. They're toxic. They are all three propaganda machines. And the other thing that's dangerous is do not let the right side tell you what the left side, or vice versa. Don't let the left side tell you what the right side is doing. So don't go to CNN to get the Fox News updates, right? Don't listen to CNN to hear what Sean Hannity or Tucker Carlson said. And don't listen to Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson to hear what Rachel Maddow said, right? Don't do that, because they are, not only are they going to take these highly politicized and highly partisan propaganda headlines that the outlets are putting out anyway, but they're going to add gas to it on both sides and going to completely try to inflame you. And so if you are hearing the majority of your Fox News headlines from CNN, you're getting a skewed view, an amplified view of their skewed world that's already skewed and amplified in the first place. And vice versa. If you're getting your CNN headline news from what you're being told by Fox News, you're getting a very amplified, skewed view of what they're saying also. And so I would encourage you, this is why I listen to Fox News and to CNN headlines. And if Sean Hannity or someone else says something that seems highly controversial, I'll actually go and listen for that clip. I'll go and find what they said and actually try to hear it in context before I critique it. And so, yeah, don't let CNN tell you what Fox News is saying. And don't let Fox News tell you what CNN and MSNBC is saying. Go and hear it for yourself. Because remember, they are creating a world, all three of those networks are creating a world where you are fearful and angry. That's the world they're trying to create. If you are fearful and angry, you are going to fit perfectly into the Fox News, CNN, MSNBC bubble. And again, this is why we need a variety of news sources. The other thing that I do is I rarely get my news from television. I rarely will sit and listen to like the evening news or turn on the 24-hour news channels. Unless there's some special event or something happening, I'll turn it on. And usually I'll try to get those as straight from the source as possible, right? If I'm going to watch a press conference, I'll watch it live stream from the White House. If I'm going to watch a State of the Union address, I'll try to get those from either from the White House feed or from another more less commercial feed like the AP or NPR or PBS, something like that. And then I rarely will stay and listen to the commentary, right? I'll watch whatever they said, and I won't stay and listen to the professionals break it down because they're going to tell me what to think about it. I'll listen to it and then I'll turn it off and think about it myself. And then I'll read the analysis online maybe the next day. So I get the bulk of my news either by listening to it on podcasts or by reading it online. And it was about a year ago that I went online and I actually changed. I have a whole bookmark section of my browser where I go through all of my news agencies, and I rearranged them all in order of bias. And at the top, I actually put the news agencies that you never hear about, and these are the native news agencies. So I have Indian Z, Native News Online, Indian Country Today. Those I have near the top of my list. And then right below that, I rank it by bias. And so I know the further down the list I go, the more deep into the pit I'm going. So the order I have my news in on my bookmarks is I have AP News at first, and then Reuters, and then the Denver Post, which are actually ranked fairly high for factual news reporting, NPR, CBS, PBS, ABC, Bloomberg, LA Times, USA Today, Chicago Tribune, New York Times, Politico, NBC, The Hill, Al Jazeera, BBC, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, The Economist, The Guardian, MSNBC, CNN, and then Fox News at the very bottom. And so again, I find if I'm going down because right, the lower you get on that list, the more sensationalized the news is going to sound. And it's going to be more interesting to read, and you're going to have more emotion, more anger, more, whatever else going on. And so it sometimes feels better, at least initially, to read the lower base news sources, but it's because you're getting drawn into their web. So I know if I'm going too far down that list too frequently, again, I'm buying into the bias. So I force myself to read the headlines at the top, and then I'll check things at the bottom after that. But I say this because I spend a lot of energy making sure that I'm getting a well-rounded news diet. And we have to be intentional about that. Because, again, all news is biased. we're always going to be given a bias. And so it's important to know what is the bias we're being fed and where and how do we digest that. And if we get it from a variety of sources, then hopefully we will do a better job of discerning ourselves. And I'll admit, listening to my podcast, I probably listen to my podcast series about 3 times a day, 3 or 4 times a day, right before I wake up, once or twice during the day, and then I'll usually listen to it soon before I go to bed. And they get repetitive. But again, it's fascinating to see how the different agencies report the same story. And then you kind of hear it from a lot of different sides. So these are just a few of my recommendations, but I really want to encourage you to be intentional about the news that you're consuming. And you're not going to be able to avoid bias, but to be intentional to know what bias you're being fed and to make sure you're getting a balance of bias so that you can actually do a better job of discerning for yourselves what it is that you're being told about the world around us. I want to just mention a few more things before I end this live stream. I've had a few people who've asked me online what I think about the Biden recovery plan, right? And right now we have, I think it's a $2 trillion recovery plan presented by the Democrats, and we have a $600 billion counteroffer put forward by the Republicans. And I've been hearing a lot of the headlines about how they want to, this is the infrastructure plan that the Democrats are proposing. I hear them talking a lot about bridges and roads and infrastructure, concrete infrastructure, things like that. But I don't know what else is really making up that entire package. And so I don't have a full opinion on what needs to be in there and what is in there. And are there some things that are not as necessary? Not that they're not priorities, but do they need to be in this infrastructure package? And then, of course, I hear the Republicans saying that they're not going to support this at all. And I hear Joe Biden saying he wants to do it by making the wealthy pay their fair share. And I hear the Republicans say that they want to add fees, which is going to it's going to cause everyday people to pay more in fees, if nothing else, to cover these expenses. So I'm still kind of making my opinion on this. I'm not quite sure. Obviously, I think we need to invest in infrastructure. It was fascinating. My daughter was writing a report the other day, and they were studying about the Great Depression. And one of the articles they had read about the Great Depression and how we got out of that as a nation was obviously we had the New Deal and a lot of investment in government programs. But one of the articles she was reading, it listed all those things and how the government was investing millions and millions of dollars to get us out of the Great Depression. But ultimately, what brought us out was World War II and the massive investment the government made in programs that brought us out of World War II, or brought us out of the Great Depression. And so right now, I see what the Democrats are trying to do, which is they're trying to bring us out of this, not depression, this huge economic shrinking that happened during the pandemic by investing a ton of money over here. And it's fascinating to see how the Republicans, once they no longer have a Republican president, get incredibly fiscally conservative. The Republicans like to claim they're fiscally conservative. They're not. Republicans, you're fooling yourselves if you say you are the party of fiscal conservatism. You're not the party of fiscal conservatism. I haven't quite known how to brand you yet, but after watching both George Bush as well as Donald Trump very closely for 12 years, trust me, Republicans, you are not fiscally conservative. You're fiscally conservative when there's Democrats in the White House, but you're not a party that values fiscal conservatism, nor are you necessarily a party that values small government. I'm still trying to figure out what it is Republicans stand for, and I'm fascinated by watching them fight over Donald Trump right now. I'm also fairly convinced Donald Trump is not a true Republican. But anyway, that's a whole fascinating thing going on. But yeah, Republicans, can you stop pretending that you're fiscal conservatives? Because you're not. At least not when you have the White House and the Senate and the you can have some control in Congress. You're not fiscally conservative. So let's cut the crap on that. I also will add that I'm a bit concerned about the massive amount of spending that the Democrats are proposing, and the massive amount of debt that we're adding every year to our national deficit. So this is why I don't have a full opinion on the recovery plan yet, but I am pondering it and thinking about it and trying to make sense of everything and what's actually being included in this bill, and are there some things that we need and things we don't need. The other thing I just want to comment on is the pandemic. And right, we have to take some things in context regarding the pandemic. As a nation, we are being told and we're telling ourselves the light's at the end of the tunnel and we're coming out of the pandemic. We have vaccinated about 30 to 35% of our population, I believe, at least with one shot. But we've also kind of reached the point where most people who want a shot have been able to get it. And so now it's about convincing the other 60% of the nation that they should get the vaccine. And that's what the Biden administration is trying to do. But we're telling ourselves this pandemic is over. Meanwhile, if you look at numbers globally, they're at the highest point they have ever been. We have more daily infections than we've ever had on a global scale. It's not just India that is going through this right now. There's numerous countries that are, right? And it's because the richer Western nations hoarded all the vaccines, and we vaccinated as much of our population as possible before we even began considering what we're going to do about other vulnerable communities or populations around the globe. And so we have hoarded. I think the US, I read a few days ago, had contracted for 1 billion doses of vaccines. Literally buying up far more than we need, reserving them for ourselves, and not allowing other nations to purchase them. And even though there's not a nation there who want to purchase them that can't, because we have all of them on order, not just us, but the UK and Israel and other nations like that, Canada. But then we have all these nations who can't even afford vaccines. And so when you look at what's happening globally, and then you see what we're doing here nationally, it's not just the South, right? We have several states in the South that have taken away all social distancing and mask mandates and everything, and they're just going back to like there was no pandemic at all. But then we have other states, whether it's New York or California, that are opening up a lot more too. And yes, there's still some social distancing, but it's like we're not, A, we don't have herd immunity. B, we don't have even 50% of our population vaccinated. None of our children have been vaccinated yet. And we're beginning to act and speak like this thing is over. And I'm finding this fascinating and troubling because, right, this is what happened throughout the entire pandemic. If you remember a year ago, let's go back to March of 2020 when the pandemic first hit. And we were told, oh, this is just going to be a 5-week disruption. We're going to shut things down for a few weeks. That wasn't it. And the way we coped with this pandemic nationally is we coped with it in 4 to 6 week segments. Oh, it's just going to be until, from March until May. And then by May, we'll have all the kids back in school. We'll be open up. Everything will be fine. And then it wasn't May. Well, by 4th of July, we'll be okay. And then, by fall, we'll be okay. And we kept on coping with this by telling ourselves we're going to end this soon, which led to a frustration, right? At no point did anyone say, you know what, we're going to be in this for the better part of a year, or maybe even 2 years. And now, well, it's good we're getting vaccinated. It's not good that we've left this virus to run rampant globally, right? This isn't a localized epidemic. This is a global pandemic. And just stopping it here is not going to end the pandemic. And so I'm actually taking a very cautious tone and stance towards this. I know how frustrating. I feel this every day, right? Where things are shut down, and all this other stuff, and we want just life to get back to normal. But I am taking a more cautious approach to the opening up that's happening, especially because I've only received one shot of the vaccine. So has my wife and my older son, and our 2 daughters haven't received any because they're under the age of 16. And so we're still being very cautious as a family. We're still being very cautious with our community, the community we live in. And right, even once we get vaccinated, I'm not going to start running around because, again, I am not convinced that we have the ability to open up the way we're being told we have the ability to open up right now. We don't have herd immunity. A majority of our citizens are not excited about getting vaccinated. And we have done a crappy job. And this is on us and other rich Western nations. We have done a piss poor job of treating this as a global pandemic. And so I think we need to be very cautious about that. So those are a few thoughts I have. There's a bunch of talk right now in the news about the Olympics, and I'm not convinced having the Olympics right now is a good idea. It's about 11 weeks now until the Olympics are supposed to open. Japan is in the middle of a surge. Again, global numbers are through the roof. I don't see how we can have Olympics a year ago and our numbers are even higher globally today. I don't see how we can have the Olympics right now. That's my thoughts. Those are my opinions on it. Anyway, I just wanted to come on and have a bit more of a dialogue about some of these things. This afternoon, I'm hoping to do a live stream about my book, Unsettling Truths. And if you have any questions you'd like to ask about that, please either tag me in them on social media, put them on my wall, or you can tag them to me on social media. I'm going to be getting a link up where you can submit questions via email. I think there's a comment section on my website. If you go there, you can also submit questions there. But if you have questions about my book, Unsettling Truths, I'm going to be talking about that later this afternoon, hopefully around 3 p.m. And then I think over this weekend, and I've been talking about doing this for a while, and I've been trying to get my thoughts together, but I've been working through some stuff regarding decolonizing faith. And I've been trying to figure out the best way to articulate them, and I think I'm going to give it a try this weekend, either Saturday or Sunday. And I'm going to talk about it through a lens of, it's a conference that I started. I was a co-founder of this conference with some other Native leaders, called Would Jesus Eat Fry Bread? And we asked that question, we named the conference that because of the very colonial way that the Christian faith was brought to Native peoples through the boarding schools and being told we had to forcibly be assimilated to Western European culture. And so we asked the question in this conference. We created a space where we could ask, can we eat fry bread? Can we be of our culture and be of this faith? Or do we have to assimilate and become colonized in order to participate in the Christian faith? And this is a journey I've been on for the bulk of my adult life. And so I'm going to take some time this weekend to talk a little bit about that, as well as some insights I've been gaining over the past maybe 9 months since last summer. of what I'm thinking about that and where I'm going to go with some of those things. It's a huge step in trying to decolonize faith. And so I'm going to share some of that this weekend. And I'll put up a link about that when I'm going to do that, either Saturday or Sunday. I'm not sure exactly which day yet. But those are the things I wanted to talk about. So I can't help my relatives. I want to thank you for joining me for this second cup of coffee. I am trying to change the format, make it a bit more casual, but hopefully this one went longer than I wanted it to be, but hopefully they'll be shorter. I may even think about bringing some guests on with me to have a second cup of coffee with me to talk about some different things. But yeah, I'm working at seeing what we can do over the next 18 to 24 months to grow this platform and really engage with a much broader audience. So, and for those who tried to watch the sunrise with me this morning, I apologize. My phone, I had some technical difficulties. My Facebook app crashed, and so I wasn't able to live stream it on Facebook. I tried to record it locally, and I guess the app crashing didn't allow me to record sound on my phone. So I had a great video of the sunrise, but there was no sound to it. I posted that on my YouTube channel. And then after it was all over and I had more time, I uninstalled and reinstalled my Facebook app, and everything's working fine on there now. It's going to be raining for the next few days, so I won't be able to do a sunrise probably until Sunday or Monday. But yeah, I had some technical difficulties this morning. But if you have a chance, go on my YouTube channel. I did post the silent version there, and it was a pretty stunning sunrise. So the water was unbelievably calm. It was really fun to watch that. But I hope you have a good day, my relatives. Walk in beauty, and then we learn how to walk in beauty together. And go on that.